So luxury beliefs are ideas and opinions that confer status on the upper class while often inflicting costs on the lower classes. And the way I came up with this idea was, I would read Veblen, and Veblen said things like, so again, he was writing the late 1800s, and he noticed that the sort of upper class in North America and Europe, they displayed their symbols of wealth with their clothing. For example, the men would wear very fancy suits and women would wear these evening gowns, very like delicate and restrictive clothing. They would carry certain kinds of jewelry, pocket watches, monocles, hats, powdered wigs. All these kinds of things were these sort of material symbols of one's status in society. Well, I thought about what's going on today. We still have an upper class, and they still desire to signal their status in some way. But things have changed since, a century or more ago. I think among the upper class, what I've noticed is that it's become somewhat gauche or kind of vulgar now to signal your status with luxury goods, with material goods. And at least within some sectors of the upper class, it's almost it almost reduces your status because, like, there's like this environmentally friendly movement, this idea of minimalism, asceticism, and so on, that, if you have these big, loud goods, maybe you're doing damage to the environment, or or in some cases they accuse you of like overcompensating, or there's just something gauche and something
you might be flaunting your privilege.
Flaunting privilege, right? There's a lot of concern about that too. So the upper class of the past, they would wear certain clothes, whereas today you see like tech billionaires, right? Like the famous example of Zuckerberg and the flip flops and the cargo shorts. So if the upper class is not displaying their status with luxury goods, at least not as much anymore, how are they doing it? And I claim that they're doing it through their beliefs, their opinions, their ideas. And these ideas tend to be at odds with the beliefs of ordinary, conventional people who maybe don't attend elite universities or don't spend time around people who have lots of money and a lot of leisure time. And so today, like the leisure class of the past, and today it still happens, but, they might play golf or go beagling or something. Whereas today, a lot of the leisure class, they spend a lot of time on Twitter. They spend a lot of time on social media, sort of signaling back and forth at each other to keep up with whatever the latest trends are. And we can get into specific examples of luxury beliefs, but just to close this off, this explanation, some people would ask, well, how do you know that upper class people even want to signal their status, their beliefs? Maybe things have changed. Maybe in the past that's how they were, but today they're not like that anymore. And this is when I draw on recent research in psychology. So Cameron Anderson at UC Berkeley, some other scholars, I believe they're European scholars, but both in America and in Europe, researchers have basically collected data from people, asking them about their levels of education, how much money they make, their sort of prestige of their jobs, and so on. And then they ask them questions regarding how much they would desire to have influence or status or power. How much would you like to influence other people? How much would you like to hold a position of prominence in society? These kinds of questions. And what the researchers find is that there's a positive correlation between one's current position in society and their desire for social status. So essentially, the higher up you are in the status ladder, the more status you want, which is perhaps somewhat counterintuitive, because you might think that, it's the people who don't have much who would really want that status. People on the bottom end of that ladder who, are struggling, who have lower incomes and so on. Like, those are the people who want status, but it's not true. It's the people at the top who actually want more. And if you can't do it through luxury goods, then I claim that you're going to want to do it through your luxury beliefs.
So there's that's a pretty healthy thesis in terms of its size and how you've articulated it there. And I thought something that might be interesting to explore and something to hang on to this work that you've been doing is when someone is remembering that someone pointed out to me in 2016. Obviously, were you still at Yale in 2016?
I was, yep.
Yeah. So 2016, we had two relatively upending political events in my country and in yours. And I saw someone on Twitter, I forget who they were, so they'll be anonymous forever, say, liberals are always in favor of the working class until they vote the wrong way, at which point they become thick racist proles. Now, that's quite venomously worded, but what it looked like to me is similar to what you were saying. It's the fact that, confusingly, the people more to the left of the political spectrum tended to vote Remain, as in remain in the European Union. And I'm pretty sure the voting data was overwhelmingly metropolitan in, how you could predict it. So big cities voted Remain, smaller, more rural areas tended to vote to Leave and Leave one, of course. But yeah, I noticed just that it was strange. It was like overnight, the people who previously had been champions of the working class were decrying their new enemy as ignorant and, in need of education. So it went, yes, this hierarchy thing that you've been describing emerged almost out of the void instantaneously.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I think that, of course, at the individual level, we all sort of have our reasons for why we hold our beliefs, but I think that one reason in particular, at least among the upper class, is just this, and Veblen wrote about this too. I mean, he had this, the way that he wrote in the late 19th century, he said something like the upper classes are afraid of like the odiousness of the lower classes. Like they don't want to come into contact with those ideas for fear of contamination. I don't want you to mistake me as being one of the proles or the plebes or whatever. And so one way I can do this is to show you just how much I despise Trump or how much I condemn, the sort of Brexit movement or whatever. And so I think things have seemed to have taken a shift lately where, sometimes I think like in the past, maybe the more left of center, the more liberal movements were more in favor of the working class back when they could signal their status with their clothes, right? So like if I can wear, really fancy attire, and immediately just laying your eyes on me that I'm a member of the upper class, then I can champion whatever I want because you already know my position in society. But if, I'm wearing flip-flops and cargo shorts and I need you to know that I'm a member of the elite, well, I have to do it through having different beliefs than people who would ordinarily wear flip-flops and cargo shorts. Right.
Yeah. So it's... Well, it was Rory who brought you to my attention, and Rory, when I was speaking to him, of course, said, if you're a chief exec and you cycle to work, that's patently a choice. Is that similar to what you're describing there?
Yeah, that actually, I remember I listened to that conversation and I loved it, by the way. But that was great. He said something like, if you wear a bicycle, or if you ride a bicycle to work and you're an executive, you're riding the bike because you want to. But if you're riding the bike to work and you work at Pizza Hut, it's because you have to. And so the same exact act or the same exact, material goods or choices or whatever have different meanings depending on who's doing it and the reasons behind it. And I think what Rory was getting at there, and this is actually something that I've been struggling with the luxury beliefs idea. So I think Rory was almost getting at this idea of what's called counter signaling. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the research I believe this is an economics research, signaling is basically I'm trying to tell you information about myself, not necessarily consciously. The clothes that I wear, the way that I speak, my interests and so on, those are all signals. I'm leaking information about myself to you. But counter signaling is sort of deliberately trying not to impress you. So I'm trying to impress you by trying not to impress you, basically. And so if I'm if I'm the chief executive and maybe the dress code at my firm is, suit and tie, but I'm the chief executive and I come into work wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, I'm counter signaling to you that I'm so high up here that I don't need to impress anyone. There's some other research on this too with, sort of related to the stuff that I do, the PhD dissertations. So, at the end, you have to produce this 200-page manuscript of all the work that you've done throughout your PhD. And researchers found that PhD students at lower ranked colleges use more complex vocabulary in their dissertations, whereas PhD students in top tier universities use more simple, less complex language, less jargon. And their explanation was basically that for students at the top tier colleges, they don't feel the need to impress anyone with their intelligence. You know, they can say, well, I already attended this great university, so I can just explain my ideas in a more simple way. Whereas people at the lower tier universities may feel this pressure to signal their intelligence. So with the luxury beliefs, there's a little bit of a mixture. It's not an airtight claim that the upper class will always try to differentiate themselves from the lower classes. And sometimes they'll even adopt some of the mannerisms of the lower classes or even the underclass in whatever, maybe sometimes the way that they dress or the way they talk. They'll adopt some of the slang, for example, of the lower classes when they talk to one another. But they really, I think of it as almost like a 3-tier system where there's sort of like the lower end, the middle, and the top. And so the lower end, they already know they're at the bottom. And so they're trying to some degree, emulate the middle. And the middle is trying to emulate the top. The top is trying to differentiate themselves from the middle. And so one way they can do this is by mimicking the mannerisms and habits and tastes of the bottom, right? Because no one is going to mistake an upper class person for being at the bottom, but they might mistake them for being in the middle. And so what they're really trying to do is differentiate themselves from that middle, the sort of conventional, the typical person.